I open my notebook to a blank page, and for a moment, I just stare at it. The lines seem endless, like rows of tiny, empty containers waiting to be filled. I can almost see my entire life spread out on this page, each blank space mocking me with possibility, or maybe with the inevitability of failure. And then, in my mind's eye, I see her lips, their subtle curve, the faint shimmer of gloss. They're pressed against someone else, not me. It's a kiss that doesn't belong in my home, in my marriage, in my life. I press the pen to the paper but write nothing, as if I'm afraid that once the words spill out, I won't be able to take them back. I still remember the first time I realized something was off. It was a Wednesday, a day that usually means business as usual. Conference calls in the morning, paperwork in the afternoon, dinner with Rebecca at night. But that Wednesday, she came home humming, her cheeks a little flushed, like she'd drunk a sip of champagne when no one was looking. I was in the kitchen, scanning through real estate reports on my phone. I can't say exactly what alarmed me, only that the air around her had changed. She slipped off her shoes, walked across the living room, and there was a sparkle in her eyes. A secret, a hidden gem she wasn't ready to share, or maybe she'd never share it at all. I forced a smile. "Busy day?" I asked, my tone so casual it sounded forced to my own ears. She just shrugged and replied with a vague, "Same old." But her smile was different, a smile that had nothing to do with me. I didn't press. I turned back to my phone, pretending to be engrossed in the numbers, the deals. Yet something crackled in the air. My job requires me to pay attention to details, to sense the intangible differences in clients' moods, in negotiations, in the tremor of a voice during a high-stakes pitch. I recognized that tone in her posture. She was covering something up. Sometimes, in relationships, trust is like a fortress built stone by stone over years. Each day, each shared breakfast, each quiet night in front of the TV is another brick. But a single secret can start to crumble that fortress from within. And the worst part is that at first, you don't see the cracks. You just sense them. That Wednesday, those cracks began. But I was too proud to see them for what they were. Instead, I chalked it up to her usual flirtations, or maybe a new hobby. A woman needs her space, I told myself. She's allowed to have her secrets, right? Except, secrets in marriage are never just secrets. They're slow poison. The next few weeks passed with an undercurrent of tension. I'd see little changes in her routine. She'd leave the house earlier, or come back a bit later, claiming she'd been shopping or meeting a girlfriend for lunch. She started carrying her phone around the house like it was a lifeline, never letting it rest on the coffee table when she left the room. I tried to stay calm, but every so often, my voice would break away from my usual composure, and I'd ask, "Everything okay?" She would always answer, "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" with a tight-lipped smile. During one of my more restless nights, I woke up around 2 a.m. and noticed her side of the bed was empty. Alarmed, I jumped out of bed, only to find her standing in the dark kitchen, staring out the window. She didn't hear me approach. I heard her sigh, then saw her shoulders tremble, as though she was both excited and terrified by some private thought. I didn't say a word. I went back to bed, heart pounding. I don't know why I was afraid to confront her right then. Maybe I just wasn't ready to hear the answer. I found the check by accident. It was tucked away in the garbage can, near the bottom, under crumpled receipts and old tea bags. It was written out to a local linen shop. Some large sum for custom bedding. We have plenty of sheets and towels, so this purchase struck me as odd. That alone wouldn't normally trigger alarm, but it was the sneaky way she tried to hide it that burned a hole in my gut. If she wanted new bedding, she would just say so. I would have shrugged it off, let her buy whatever she wanted. But she didn't want me to see it. Even then, I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's for a friend. Perhaps she's planning some surprise. But deep down, an ember of suspicion glowed red-hot. My instincts told me it wasn't about linen at all. We were in the living room that evening, both pretending to watch a gardening show. The host was explaining how to prune rose bushes, and I decided to test the waters. "Hey," I began slowly. "I noticed the receipts were missing. Did you buy some new sheets?" She jerked her head toward me, eyes wide for a second before she smoothed her expression. "No," she said, too quickly. Then she paused. "I mean, not exactly. It was just a small thing. I might return it anyway." She crossed her arms over her chest, an unspoken sign of defensiveness. I stared at her. She looked away, her gaze flicking back to the TV screen. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say more, but no words came out. Her silence carved into me. A small, anxious laugh erupted from my throat, my voice breaking away, shaky, and not at all reassuring. She frowned but said nothing. In that moment, the distance between us felt insurmountable. Late one night, I was downstairs in my study, trying to lose myself in real estate project plans, when I found something on my desk I'd almost forgotten about. The DNA test kit, unopened and half buried beneath a stack of documents. It was something I'd bought weeks earlier, out of sheer curiosity about my ancestry. I'd set it aside, but now a wild thought flashed through my mind. What if? I decided to look up the instructions. The next day, I spat into the little plastic tube, sealed it, and sent it off. I didn't mention it to Rebecca. I told myself it was a random impulse, a way to keep my mind off darker thoughts. But in the days that followed, every time I thought about that test, a new possibility ignited inside me. Secrets can run in more than one direction. Step 1 to killing trust: plant a single doubt. That was the note I scribbled in my notebook. You'd think the person planting the doubt would be the betrayer, but in my case it was me, the betrayed, who nurtured the doubt in my own mind. I fanned the flame of suspicion because I couldn't stand not knowing. The fortress of marriage was already cracking, and I was done pretending everything was fine. A week later, I came home early from a site visit. As I entered the driveway, I noticed another vehicle parked near the side of the house, an older truck with a few decals on the back. My stomach clenched. I could hear muffled voices through the open kitchen window. Hers, but also a man's. My body tensed, every muscle tight as a vice. Still, I moved quietly, step by painstaking step, around the corner of the house. The voices were louder now, drifting from the living room, accompanied by soft laughter. My heart hammered in my ears. I heard a rustle, a sound like bodies brushing together. Then a pause. And then I heard a kiss. Not a polite, friendly peck, but a slow, lingering kiss. My wife's sigh was laced with a softness I hadn't heard in a long time. My breath caught in my throat. She'd never made a sound like that for me, at least not in recent memory. Anger and disbelief pulsed through my veins, but I found myself strangely frozen, as if I were an observer in someone else's nightmare. I peeked around the edge of the window. They stood there in the living room. Him, tall, rugged, wearing a flannel shirt, boots. He looked like he belonged anywhere but my house. I could see her face, eyes closed, lips parted against his. Her hands slid around his waist. My hands balled into fists, nails digging into my palms. I should have stormed in. Should have yanked him off her, demanded answers, made a scene. Instead, I stepped back. A wave of cold washed over me, and I realized with a jolt that cold is indeed an emotion. It's the feeling that sets in when fire is extinguished, replaced by a bleak emptiness. The second step to killing trust. Observe the raw truth with your own eyes. I waited outside, in my own yard, hidden behind a hedge, shame burning my throat. Eventually, I heard the door open, and they came out, still laughing softly. The man brushed his palm against her cheek, and she gave him a quick kiss right there on my front porch. Then he climbed into that old truck and drove off. She lingered at the doorway, adjusting her hair, as if savoring the aftertaste of betrayal. When I finally walked in, she was sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. She glanced at me and forced a pleasant smile. I asked how her day was, voice trembling only slightly. She shrugged, said it was fine. Nothing new. I couldn't meet her eyes. Instead, I sat in my armchair across the room, my thoughts swirling with silent rage and heartbreak. We were in the same room, but it felt like an unbridgeable chasm separated us. Sometimes, confrontation is a release, a raging storm that passes through and leaves clarity in its wake. But I refused to give her that. The third step to killing trust is to let the betrayal breathe. To neither bury it nor confront it directly, but to let it fester. So I gave her the gift of my silence, anticipating it would do more damage than any shouted accusation could. Over the next days, I took note of every detail. The times she left, the times she returned, the text messages she tried to hide. My mind was calculating, almost detached, as if I were an undercover detective in my own marriage. Meanwhile, a slow simmer of anger ran beneath everything I did. She must have noticed the tension, but she pretended not to. We lived in a house of illusions. Her illusions that I was clueless, and my illusions that I could contain my wrath. We had half conversations, snatches of dialogue that felt stilted. "How was your day?" she'd ask absently. "Fine," I'd reply. Another project came through. "That's good. I'm meeting Sally tomorrow for lunch." A lie. I knew it. She probably was going to see him. She expected me to either challenge her or let it go, so I forced the tiniest nod. "Have fun." She swallowed hard, eyes flicking up to mine, as if searching for any sign of suspicion. I gave her nothing. My voice was calm, but something behind my eyes must have cracked, because I saw her stiffen. She cleared her throat. "Yeah, thanks." Then I walked away, leaving her in a swirl of guilt or maybe defiance. I was never sure. I only knew that the fortress of our relationship was now beyond saving. And it was all her doing. The DNA test results arrived 2 weeks later, an envelope that ended up in my office mailbox. I'd nearly forgotten about the entire thing, preoccupied as I was with the evidence of her infidelity. But when I tore the envelope open, the papers I found inside turned my blood to ice. They said my paternal lineage had certain markers that contradicted a story my mother had once told me about my father's side. So it wasn't about children or anything that would implicate Rebecca in fatherhood. But it rattled me. If my own ancestry could be questionable, then nothing was off limits. My entire sense of identity was under siege. First, from the revelation that my father might have withheld secrets, and second, from the knowledge that my wife was crossing lines with another man. I dropped the papers onto my desk, exhaling the shaky breath. My father had died years ago. I couldn't ask him for answers. I was alone in this labyrinth of half-truths and hidden loyalties. And so, I turned my attention back to the one thing I could control: my revenge. Rebecca's lover's name was Gabe. I found that out from some casual online research, courtesy of the stable she apparently visited for riding lessons. There was a staff photo with a short bio: Gabriel Sawyer, riding instructor. A few lines about his passion for horses, his southern roots, the local competitions he'd won. He had a charming smile in the photo, a rugged handsomeness I could see appealing to her need for excitement. I wondered if she was buying linen for him. Some newly decorated bedroom space that they planned to share like honeymooners. The thought made me sick. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual. One of the junior partners asked if I was feeling all right. I brushed him off. Inside, I was planning a different sort of confrontation, one that wouldn't be so obvious. Because I knew that if I truly unleashed the fury inside me, I might do something I'd regret. Something physical, something irreversible. Instead, I would use silence as my weapon. I'd show her that she was about to lose everything she thought she could rely on. Late one evening, after a grueling day at work, I came home to find her in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge for something to eat. I stood there in the doorway, arms folded, watching her. She must have sensed my presence because she turned around abruptly, nearly dropping a bottle of sparkling water. "Oh God, you scared me," she said with a forced laugh. I just stared. My heart pounded so loudly, I could barely hear my own thoughts. Now was the time. I needed to push her, to see how far she'd go to maintain the charade. "Sorry," I said at last, stepping into the light. "I didn't mean to startle you." Her face softened for a moment. "Are you all right? You seem upset." "I'm tired," I lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. I was exhausted from the emotional tightrope I'd been walking. "Busy day." She nodded, her eyes scanning me, searching for hints of suspicion. "You want me to warm up dinner?" I shook my head. "No need." My voice trembled, but I continued. "I'm going upstairs to review some documents. Might be a while before I get to bed." She bit her lip. "Okay. Let me know if you need anything." For a moment, the image of her with Gabe flashed in my mind. The kiss, the hush, the stolen moment. A wave of bitterness rose in my throat, and I felt my voice try to tear away from me. I almost said, "I needed you to be faithful," or something equally raw, but I swallowed it down. I merely nodded and walked away, leaving her in the cold silence I'd come to embrace. Exposition of trust turned into development of betrayal. Then the time for a climax seemed to loom. One evening, she walked into my office, her expression tense. I looked up from my desk, raising an eyebrow. We rarely intruded on each other's personal space these days. She cleared her throat. "David, is something going on? You've been so distant. I feel like you barely talk to me anymore." I forced a smile, like a man wearing a mask. "You sure you're not the one who's distant?" Her jaw tightened. "Look, I know I've been a little off lately. Just got a lot on my mind." Her attempt at honesty felt like an insult. She was giving me tidbits of truth to keep the facade going. I could have confronted her. "I know about Gabe. I saw you together." But I wanted to see how long she'd keep lying. I stood, stepping around the desk, closing the distance between us. She backed up slightly, eyes flickering. For a moment, I thought she might confess, but she'd just crossed her arms, biting the inside of her cheek. "What's really on your mind, Rebecca?" I asked quietly. She took a slow, shaky breath. I'm just thinking about us. Our marriage. Things have been different." I let out a soft laugh, though it wasn't really laughter, more a harsh exhale of disbelief. "Different. That's one way to put it." She waited, silent. I stared at her, waiting for an admission, a plea, something. But she said nothing. Her lips trembled, and I could see she was holding back tears. Maybe she wanted me to make the first move, to shout or demand an explanation so she could unburden her guilt. I refused to give her that satisfaction. I turned away, picked up a file from my desk. "I have work," I said flatly. She left without another word. I stood there, the hush of the room pressing down on me. The pain was a living thing, lodged in my chest, but I refused to let it out. A few nights later, I followed her. She said she was going for a ride, that she needed fresh air. It was around sunset. I watched from my car as she drove out of our driveway. Then I pulled out behind her at a discreet distance. We headed down a series of winding roads, eventually reaching a rural area dotted with stables and horse pastures. I parked behind a line of tall hedges, just far enough away to remain hidden. She pulled up to a small stable, stepped out, and was greeted by Gabe in his dusty boots, a grin on his face. Cinematographically speaking, it was like slow motion. Her hair catching the sunlight as she approached him, the long shadows stretching across the ground. I saw his hand slide around her waist. They exchanged a kiss. Again, not the polite kind. I closed my eyes. This time, the coldness in me felt stronger, as if my blood had turned to ice water. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just clenched my jaw and observed. They went into one of the side barns. Dim light spilled from the windows. I couldn't make out every detail, but I could see enough. Her back against the wooden stall door, his body pressing close, her hands gripping his shoulders. The hush of that stable, broken only by the sound of their hushed laughter, felt like a betrayal of everything I'd built. It was an explicit reminder of how far gone she was. The stolen touches, the closeness of their bodies, an erotic subtext that stung me to my core. She'd never touched me like that in years, not with that fervor. My heart pounded so loudly I worried they'd hear it. But they were in their own world, lost to everything but each other. I drove away, tears burning my eyes. I wiped them roughly, furious at myself for being so weak, so human. This was my wife, the woman I'd promised to cherish, the woman who swore to honor me. And now I was the outsider, the intruder on my own life. When I arrived back home, I sat in the driveway, the engine still running. It occurred to me that the final pieces were falling into place. The check for linen, the odd schedule changes, the phone secrecy, and the writing instructor whose arms were all over her. I turned off the ignition and exhaled, focusing on the stone-cold determination flooding my veins. Now the story demanded a climax and a revenge. The question was, what form would it take? The old me might have confronted them with fists or curses, demanded a divorce right there on the spot, but that was too simple, too obvious. My revenge would be quiet. The fortress of my marriage was in ruins, but I had my own empire to protect. My business success, my carefully crafted life. I would show her she'd lost me in the worst possible way. By realizing, too late, that I would move on without her, and that she would never measure up. The next morning, I left before she woke up. I visited my lawyer. Not to file for divorce, yet, but to gather information, to set up a new will, a new estate plan that minimized her share of my assets. My lawyer raised an eyebrow, but he didn't press for details. I left that office feeling colder, emptier. That evening, she noticed a difference in me. I didn't greet her. I didn't ask how her day was. I didn't even bother to eat dinner at home. I strode in with barely a glance, picked up a few documents from my study, then walked out. She tried to talk to me, her voice unsteady. "David, wait, I paused in the hallway, back turned to her. Then, without looking, I said, "What?" She hesitated. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "No," I answered, and left. The door clicked shut behind me. That sound echoed in my mind, an omen of more to come. The real turning point came 2 days later. She must have sensed my final withdrawal, must have felt the noose of guilt tightening. She confronted me in the living room, her eyes red with tears. "David," she whispered, I need to tell you something." I stared at her, arms crossed, face blank. "I'm listening." She swallowed, her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, at last, she said, "I've been seeing someone." I raised an eyebrow. "Seeing someone? You mean the writing instructor, Gabe, correct?" Her eyes widened. You knew." I bit back a savage laugh. "Yes." She took a step forward, tears welling. "I'm so sorry. It just happened. I didn't mean." I cut her off. "You didn't mean to what?" "Kiss him. Let him put his hands all over you. Spend your days lying to me." My voice was still calm, but underneath, it trembled with quiet fury. She trembled too. "I never wanted to hurt you." I let the silence hang between us like a drawn sword. Then softly, I said, "But you did. And you can't fix that." I watched her break down, but there was no catharsis for me. I realized that the old me, the one who might have forgiven or tried to salvage something, was long gone. Now there was only the echoing emptiness, the cold. "Please," she whispered, "tell me what to do. I'll end it. I swear." I stepped closer, and she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. For a moment, I let my eyes linger on her features. This woman I once loved with everything in me. Then I said, "Stop lying. You wanted him. You wanted whatever thrill he gave you. Be honest with yourself for once." She stifled a sob, covering her mouth. I turned and walked away, leaving her shuddering in the living room. Step by step, I climbed the stairs, ignoring her choked pleas. Behind me, in the silence, I could sense the final collapse of everything we'd built. My revenge wasn't a scene of violence or shouting. It was far more devastating. I let her see me thrive. I closed a deal on a prime piece of commercial real estate that promised to triple my investment. I networked aggressively, expanding my professional circle, hosting client dinners, everything she'd once dreamed of sharing. I was unstoppable, and she was sidelined. She tried to reach out, text me, leave messages. Sometimes I'd read them, sometimes not, but I rarely replied. At home, we existed like strangers. She looked smaller, more fragile, as though the guilt and shame were gnawing at her from the inside. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. Instead, I displayed my new achievements with cold pride, making sure she was reminded, every waking moment, of what she was losing. And then there was Gabe. I imagine she tried to end things with him, or maybe he walked away to avoid drama. I never asked, never cared enough to find out. My focus was on my success, my upward trajectory that she could only watch from behind a locked gate. The final confrontation came on a Sunday evening. She stood in the doorway of my study, pale and trembling. I glanced up from my laptop, raising an eyebrow. "David," she began, voice shaking, "please, can we just talk?" I closed my laptop, leaning back in my chair. "All right." She approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. Her posture was hunched, shoulders sagging. I know I messed up. I can't change that. But I still want to try to save this. Save us. I studied her face. Memories flickered through my mind. Our wedding day, the early struggles, the nights we spent dreaming of a future together. Then I saw the stable scene, the kisses, the betrayal. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "I'm not sure there's anything left to save." Her lips trembled. "I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy. I'll prove it to you, if you just give me the chance." I let out a long exhale, drumming my fingers on the desk. "Do you know how it feels," I began, "to watch the woman you love kissing another man in your own living room, or to see her pressed up against him in a barn, moaning his name?" She flinched at my directness. My voice cracked, but I forced myself to continue. "The emptiness, the coldness I feel now, I never want to feel anything else. Because at least this way, I'm not destroyed by it." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. Eventually, she let out a choked sob. "I'm so sorry." I rose from my chair and walked around the desk, standing directly in front of her. "Maybe you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't fix what's been broken." She raised her eyes to mine, searching for any flicker of warmth, any sign of forgiveness. But I gave her none. I lifted my hand. She flinched, perhaps expecting a slap or some violent act. Instead, I gently brushed my thumb across her cheek, wiping away a tear. The gesture only made her sob harder. "Tomorrow," I said, "I'm having the locks changed." Her eyes widened in horror. "David, no." I cut her off. "I've also transferred a good chunk of our liquid funds into an account under my name. You'll get your share if we finalize a divorce. But until then, I won't let you undermine what I've built." She gasped, stepping back. "You'd do that to me." "You did this," I said, with a calm finality. "I'm just returning the favor." Her hands fell to her sides, lifeless, her face etched in shock. In that moment, the final piece of my revenge slotted into place, letting her know she had lost. Not just me, but the security, the comfort, the pride she once took in being my wife. She tried to speak, to beg, but only jagged sobs broke the silence. I left her standing there, tears streaking her face, and walked past her into the hallway. That night, I took my car and drove aimlessly, winding up at the edge of a lake just outside the city. The moon cast a silvery light across the water. I parked and got out, letting the breeze wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel something beyond anger or coldness. My father's possible deception, my mother's incomplete truths, my wife's betrayal, all of it swirled in my mind. For a moment, I let out a ragged breath that turned into something like a sob. I pressed my fists against my eyes, as if I could hold back the flood of pain. Then, slowly, I let it come. The heartbreak, the disappointment, the sense of loss. My chest shuddered, and I let out a cry that shattered the night's stillness. I don't know how long I stood there, but by the time I returned to my car, I felt a strange clarity. The fortress was gone, but I was still standing, and maybe that was enough. When I got home, she was gone. A suitcase missing from the closet, her toiletries cleared from the bathroom. The only sign of her was an empty glass on the kitchen counter, a lipstick smudge at the rim. I stared at it, remembering how those lips had once been mine. Then I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed. The next morning, her note sat on the dining table. It read, "I need space. I'm sorry." I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in work. Meetings, deadlines, site visits. My schedule was packed. I avoided the hush of the house by staying out late, overseeing construction, or taking conference calls from my car. People around me noticed a renewed focus, a fierce drive that brokered deals with an edge I'd never shown before. And though part of me understood that this was my coping mechanism, I couldn't stop. Achievement was my armor now, a shield that kept the shards of my broken marriage at bay. Rebecca's messages trickled in sporadically. Occasionally, she'd call. Usually, I let it ring out. Once, I picked up, listening in silence as she pleaded for another chance, telling me she'd made a terrible mistake. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I don't even want him anymore." The quiet on my end must have been unbearable for her. Finally, I said, "I know you're sorry," and hung up. Because sorry is an empty word, a bandage that covers a gaping wound but never heals it. In the final stage of my revenge, I became everything she'd ever wanted me to be, but not for her. The success, the sophistication, the respect from colleagues and clients. I took on bigger projects, soared to new heights, bought a new car. People congratulated me, admired my ambition. But if you looked closely in my eyes, you might see a hollowness there, a ghost haunting the ruins of my heart. She, on the other hand, drifted aimlessly, or so I heard through mutual acquaintances. She tried to hold on to the illusions of excitement that Gabe once offered, but from what little I gleaned, he wasn't sticking around for a long-term commitment. Their fling fizzled under the harsh light of reality, leaving her alone, facing a life that no longer seemed bright or promising. I never confronted Gabe. There was no need. I knew that he lacked the stamina to be the man she wanted. Let him roam free in his stables, riding horses. I had bigger battles to fight, within myself. Eventually, the divorce papers were drawn. I let her keep the old family car, a few pieces of the houseware she wanted. My lawyer suggested we approach the settlement aggressively, but I wasn't interested in punishing her financially beyond reason. I just wanted to be done. I wanted to let her see how trivial she'd become to me. We finally met in person to sign the final documents, at a neutral office, a sterile room with a large wooden table. The air conditioner hummed. She looked tired, older than her years, as though the burden of regret weighed heavily on her. I managed a polite nod. She tried to meet my gaze. I didn't reciprocate. The tension was palpable, but we exchanged no words. At the end of it, she placed her pen down with a trembling hand and said softly, "David, for what it's worth, I'm so sorry." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I know," I replied, echoing the words from that phone call. Then I stood and left. She didn't follow. They say that after a great storm, the silence can be just as deafening as the thunder before it. That's how it felt in the weeks following our divorce. A hush enveloped my days, not the dreaded hush of suspicion and betrayal, but a quieter, more reflective one. I found myself at my desk again, opening that notebook to a blank page. My old scribbles were there, notes on how to kill trust in 3 steps. Doubt, observation, letting the betrayal breathe. I read them over, an odd detachment settling in my chest. I picked up my pen and wrote, "My story doesn't end here." That was the only line I managed, but it felt like a declaration of survival. I was still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. The fortress was gone, but maybe I didn't need its walls anymore. In the final sense, I think about what she said. "I never wanted to hurt you." Maybe she believed that. But actions carved deeper into reality than intentions ever could. The scalding memory of seeing her with him will always be etched into my mind. And yet, a part of me has made peace with it. Because her betrayal was a mirror, forcing me to confront the illusions I held about our marriage. Perhaps we both clung to appearances long after our love had quietly died. Revenge, I learned, is never as satisfying as you imagine. Yes, I watched her world crumble. I saw her shrivel under the weight of her mistakes. But it didn't bring me pure triumph. It brought me a cold emptiness, a knowledge that I could break ties without shedding tears, at least not publicly. The real prize is in moving on, in rebuilding for yourself, rather than for someone else's approval. Sometimes, the question arises, could we have saved our marriage? Maybe if I'd confronted her earlier, if she'd been honest sooner. But we didn't. We let it rot until nothing was left except regret. Cold is also an emotion. In a way, it kept me alive when rage would have destroyed me. Tonight, I stand in the quiet of my new condo, not as large as the house we once shared, but it suits me. I walk to the balcony, look out at the distant skyline of Austin, the lights flickering like scattered diamonds. I take a slow, steady breath. My phone sits on a side table. It's been buzzing with notifications about new projects, new opportunities. For once, I ignore them. Instead, I reflect on what it means to return to myself. Maybe it means allowing my heart to thaw, if only a little. Maybe it means acknowledging that trust is fragile, and once broken, you can't just patch it up. It means owning the choices I made, the silent revenge, the quiet finality, the locked doors. I make no apologies for it. I did what I had to do to survive. I take one last look at the city lights, then close my eyes, letting the night air cool my face. I focus on my breathing until the tension in my shoulders starts to ease. In that silence, I feel a heartbeat within me, a steady pulse, reminding me I'm still here. And as I step inside, closing the balcony door behind me, I know I've reclaimed myself, piece by broken piece, forging a future that belongs to me alone. And that, I tell myself, is enough.